Okay, so we are up to episode 6. Um, okay, this one wasn't nearly as good as the previous one because this is Simon just freaking out over the fact he didn't sleep and he has to do this callback with Von Kovacs. Now, um, the only part that was interesting was his dream. For some reason, we saw a flashback of Trevor as the Mandarin, which I'm not sure why we had that. But Trevor is not as dumb as he seemingly lets on. So I'm not just talking about him giving Simon advice, like Von Kovacs being seriously disappointed that Simon phones in his callback by recreating a scene from Pretty Woman. And yeah, he was very disappointed. Plus, I think he was low-key pissed that Simon was destroying his china. So, but then he falls asleep and he falls asleep and then he has a dream of Richard, who was supposed to play his classmate, calling him a freak. And obviously that's how he sees himself. So yeah, he's totally going to be a mutant in the MCU, provided we ever see him again. He's totally going to be a mutant. Now, Trevor, points out that he's more than just, well, he called it a condition. I guess he wanted to ensure that in case anybody was listening, they wouldn't hear that he's superpowered. But he points out that, you're more than that. You're the sum of your experiences. You're not just your superpowers. And so then he and Trevor ended up doing a scene from Wonder Man, which, I'm sorry, I thought the whole point of Von Kovacs was to not do that. That he wanted people to, pull something out of their ass, not. Maybe it wasn't a scene. Maybe they were just using those characters and it was something else. I don't know. It did, from what little we know of the Wonder Man movie, it implied that he very much is, doing a scene from the movie. So they both get the job, which, I mean, they didn't know what was going on. They were seen out, and so they were left alone. Nobody's telling them anything. So of course they're going to leave. I mean, if nobody's going to tell them shit, that makes perfect sense. Like, okay, I guess we didn't get the gig. Time to move on to something else. Hopefully, what Trevor said is also going to stabilize his powers. I was expecting him to totally lose control and his powers come out. And Von Kovacs actually saying, you know what, I actually like this. However, I also like that he doesn't know, because that ironically shows that Simon can control his powers. Something that the Doorman clause doesn't allow for. They're assuming that superpowered people are unstable and that they have no control. This shows that he has control of his powers. They really have to piss him off in order, with like Eric pissing him off or him wanting to protect Trevor, that sort of thing. Speaking of protecting Trevor, the reason I'm saying Trevor is not as dumb as he leads people to believe is because of the way he handled damage control. You're not returning my calls. I've been busy, which isn't completely a lie, but we know that he's been actively avoiding Uncle Vanya. And when they said, okay, you're going to jail. And so Trevor seemingly throws Simon under the bus by telling them that yes, Simon is very dangerous and, unstable, blah, 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 and I need more time. Well, what happened to my recording? Oh, it broke. Of course, not saying that he's the one who broke it. Oh, well, will you testify to this in court? Like, who's going to believe a former terrorist? With that sly smile, like, I gotcha. You are not getting what you want. And so it's like, I just need more time to get more evidence. Now, we know what's happening here. Trevor has been around superheroes enough. Superheroes, supervillains, he's actually not, I guess he could count Shang-Chi as a friend. But he's been around these people enough that he knows, especially after what happened earlier in the alley, that if anyone can protect him from damage control, it's Simon. So he's banking on the fact that Simon is going to save his bacon along with Simon's own. Now, we have 2 episodes left. So one is going to be, I assume, him in the role of Wonder Man and Trevor as Barnaby. And one has to be a takedown of damage control. And I don't mean that Simon's actively going to attack damage control. I'm thinking more along the lines of what happened with Miss Marvel. This idea that damage control is trying to take them down and they're actually using the fact that they're a bunch of kids to their advantage. That this idea that we're going to protect our protector, that sort of thing. So I'm assuming, obviously, nobody knows that Simon has powers at this point, but I really, really wonder if this is going to turn into another situation where he's on set, he's, doing his Wonder Man thing, and possibly he ends up using his powers. People realize that this is awesome, that, not only is he good as Wonder Man, but maybe he protects some of the actors or maybe Von Kovacs himself. And so when damage control comes to collect Simon and possibly Trevor says, oh, by the way, that they're all going to rally around Simon and keep damage control at bay. That's a possibility. But now, whether there's going to be a connection between this show and what's happening in the MCU, I don't know. Even if they choose to make him a mutant, simply because, which, by the way, I like that better than what was in the comics, which is Baron von Zemo. Baron Zemo, creating him as Wonder Man. I actually like the idea that he's a mutant better. You don't want to have too many people having mad scientist shit going on. So, yeah, I really think that they're going to rally around Simon. Now, this was done in the old ways of Marvel, in the sense that the previous Disney heads, talking showrunners, well, actually not showrunners, but head of Disney, was like, oh, this is, everyone loves Marvel, so let's, push it out like a Pez dispenser. Let's just push out product, to the point that a lot of it wasn't very good. They're just doing all sorts of shit just to satisfy Disney, as opposed to quality. So it's possible that they might still want to use Wonder Man, because, like I said, I think they're making him a mutant. And, I wouldn't mind that, because then we can bring back Trevor. And in a good way, not in a, I'm pretending to be the Mandarin. Which, by the way, Trevor probably actually thought that gun was a blank. But even if it was a blank, considering how closely it was to the man's head, I'm not sure that even if it was a blank, he could survive. So it's entirely possible Trevor really had no idea. And he did say that he was stoned out of his mind. And we saw that. He was totally stoned out of his mind. Now, whether it's because he was a failed actor, and so he was just turning to substances, or they were keeping him stoned simply so he wouldn't realize shit's real. That's a possibility too. Either way, Trevor is much smarter than he's given credit for. Let's see, what else did I want to mention about this episode? Now that Simon has this role, I really, really hope that he calms the hell down. I really hope he calms down. That it's not a matter of him overthinking things. I mean, this is a role he understands. He keeps saying he was made for this role, which technically is true. Number one, he's Simon Williams, like the character, and he has powers, like the character. So, actually, now that I think about it, I don't know if they call him a superhero, but they never showed him actually having superpowers. So, it's entirely possible that Von Kovacs knows Simon has powers. I mean, God only knows who knows about what damage control is doing and how they're, looking into Simon. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Von Kovacs knew that he has powers, and he just doesn't give a shit. But we'll have to see. There's 2 episodes left, and obviously neither's going to be filler. One has to be him being on set, and one has to be him taking on damage control, however that actually looks. And I'll have to pay attention. Hopefully I'll remember to pay attention after the last episode to see if there is a post-credit scene. So, yeah. I believe that is all I have for this episode. So with that, I will see you guys in the next video.